You don't want to go get liquored up and go cow tipping? You must be one of them introverts. So, recently I was asked in a Facebook group by somebody who talked to me back when I used to identify as a ISFP. When did you figure out that you're an extrovert? Hi there, I'm Jeff, the SP Spaz, and welcome to Type Tuesday. I could have saved this for one of my Ask Jeff Thursday videos, but I figured since it was type related, I would go ahead and do it here because I thought there's a lot of people who still have confusion about the whole introversion extroversion thing. So I thought, well, this is a good topic in general, not just keep it specific to me, though I do, of course, enjoy talking about myself. And so that's what I'm going to do mostly. But it does hit on the general ideas about the whole I versus E thing and what does that really mean? Because, again, it's one of those things where you have sort of opposite extremes of people that will tell you what it means. And neither one is necessarily entirely accurate, depending on what they're saying. At least as far as I have concluded from what I've observed and learned about this stuff. So, again, I never claim to be an expert. I just claim to know my own perspective and what makes sense to me based on what I've observed and what conclusions I've come to. So, the first thing that I always try to remind people is that the sort of what's become sort of the mainstream society stereotype of the meaning of introversion and extroversion is definitely way off, because in general practice, people tend to use it in ways that are just about situational behavior. Somebody invites someone to a party and that person says no, then people, oh, well, that person's an introvert because they didn't want to go to this specific party on this specific day. I think anybody probably who knows anything about typology knows that that's not true. Same thing with, oh, that guy's been at this bar 6 nights a week. He must be an extrovert. Obviously, that's not true either. Now, there is a connection between social behavior and introversion and extroversion because those things are about people's preferences and where they get their energy from, what they desire in terms of, sort of meeting their mental needs, you might say. So obviously, social behavior can be affected by it for sure, but it's not the only indicator. And I would say out of the Myers-Briggs 4 preferences, the introversion versus extroversion one is the hardest to observe, which, blows some people's minds. Like, what are you talking about? That's, you just watch their social behavior. No, it really isn't, because I'm personally, like, just to, clue you in, because some people will hear that and be like, well, none of them are easy to observe because you have to have a master's degree in psychology. No. Sensing versus intuition, usually if you talk to someone for more than a few minutes and that person is actually expressing themselves sort of naturally in an environment where they can be themselves to a point, if it's an intuitive type person, then you're usually going to get to a what if question, or some kind of thing where they're trying to take the subject into the concepts that get brought up by the subject. So I'm not saying it's super easy always to tell that, but a lot of times it doesn't take that long. Ns are the minority, and they do tend to stick out in some ways in conversations in if you have an environment where those things really come out. And of course, if you're in an environment full of intuitives, it's harder to tell because then they sound more alike. But most environments, intuitives will be the minority, so they do stand out and they express themselves that way. And it's not about like social awkwardness, because plenty of sensing types, including, I don't know, me, can be plenty awkward in social situations which is kind of another point in this video, because I am an extrovert by Myers-Briggs standards, and I am definitely not a social butterfly or somebody that has a million friends and just, goes to every party and glides around the room, just exploring everything. And I don't even know. Like the stereotype of the sort of social gadfly or whatever is probably like maybe 10% of actual extroverts. And also the stereotype of like the hermit who never leaves their room, just wants to be left alone and read a book, is also probably like 10%. I mean, that always wants to do that. Obviously, there are plenty of people who want to do that sometimes, but not that that's, the idea that the person is just like cowering in the corner, like, no, people, I cannot, people, no. That kind of person is a distinct minority. Oh, and yeah, the other preference is thinking versus feeling. I don't say it's super easy to identify or observe, but it usually does tend to come out just, again, if sort of issues are touched on, or any kind of situation where someone kind of talks about their decision-making process. You usually get a pretty good idea kind of what they prioritize when it comes to that sort of head versus heart debate kind of thing. Part of it is because the thinking types seem to always like to point out how logical they think they are. That's not a dig. That's just, just an observation. And the perceiving versus judging, there's a really great video that I'll try to remember to put in the description to link to you from a channel, OKA, with a guy that actually does a great, 10 minutes or so video about observing the differences between perceivers and judgers. So I'll link that just to give you, I won't say a whole lot about that, except, you can usually tell pretty quickly if someone is talking about, again, sort of their decision-making or how they go about their day. Perceiving, judging is not that hard to identify. But introversion, extroversion can be. And the reason is because it's so situational in terms of in terms of how the behavior expresses itself. So if someone is, let's just say at a party, because people love to use that for some reason, like to use the party example. If someone is at a party where the activities are something that person enjoys, then any person, introvert or extrovert, can enjoy themselves at the party because they're doing activities they enjoy. I mean, that kind of sounds like a no-brainer, but obviously to some people it isn't. They want to use that as like their sole identifier, including the official Myers-Briggs type indicator, which I've said before, even though I think it's got a lot of good uses, it does have its flaws. And one of them is, one of the questions actually says, do you always enjoy yourself at a party, or do you sometimes get bored? And that's the kind of question that should just be thrown out, because is there really anyone on the planet that always enjoys himself at a party and never gets bored? Really? Anybody? I mean, if you're that guy, go ahead and give me a comment. Let me know, because, you need to be on one of those Ripley's Believe It or Not shows or something, because I have yet to meet the person that always enjoys himself every moment of every party, because there's always a way to ruin a party. Trust me. So I don't know, that questions like that are just mind-boggling. But yeah, that's even an official MBTI question. So obviously, if the source kind of mixes that up, then the average person is going to. So how did I come to the conclusion that I'm actually an extrovert in the Myers-Briggs sense? Well, really, I'm reminded of actually one of my Faith and Type videos where I don't want to misquote him because it's been a while since I actually heard what the actual words. But so this is sort of the gist of it. And if I get it wrong, I apologize. But John, the INFP, who I interviewed in the Faith and Type series, that is Catholic and actually was a monk, or at least was part of a monastery for a short time. He basically said that he had to spend enough time with Protestants to be convinced that he should actually be Catholic. Like he had considered converting to Protestantism before spending time with a lot of Protestants. That basically they not because he couldn't stand them or anything, but just basically his previous beliefs had to sort of be tested in a way, or sort of have something to bring out the contrast, I guess, in his beliefs. Something, again, it's been a while since I watched that video, so I don't remember the exact words, but I was reminded of that when I talked about, why or how I came to the conclusion of an extrovert, because part of the way I was talking to enough introverts who kept talking about things that I didn't relate to. And the number one thing was a quote unquote need for alone time, or a need to recharge by being away from people. And I don't have that. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not times where I want specific people to go away, because obviously I think everybody has felt that. There's nobody that's so much of an extrovert that they always want to be with any kind of people ever and can't ever. But I can tell you how much of an extreme, why it's even silly to me now that I ever considered myself an introvert. Because here in my office, I've had several coworkers over the years. Most of them have stayed the same, but there's been a few that have changed. And one former coworker was annoying. She was somebody that not every day, but a lot of the time she stirred up trouble. She created drama and kind of thrived off there sort of being conflict going on between people, to an annoying degree, and just generally brought a lot of tension to the office. It's been a lot more relaxing most of the time since she's been gone. But the point I brought that up was not to bash her or anything, because I was still able to work with her, get along well with her enough for many years that wasn't really a problem. But when it came to the lunch hour, we only had we have an hour for lunch to go. Over and over again, I would go to lunch with her and another one of our coworkers that knew her before they worked together. So usually when we went out to lunch, the three of us, the two of them would talk about their stuff that or their families, their friends, and I was kind of excluded, most of the time. Most of what they were talking about ranged from just boring to, really off-putting and cringeworthy. So you say, well, why did you endure this? Why didn't you, go to lunch by yourself? Yeah, good question. Because the prospect of eating lunch by myself was off-putting enough to me that most of the time I would rather sit there and listen to these two babble about things I don't care about, and in some cases I'm annoyed by, than spend that time by myself. Pretty good indicator that one is an extrovert when the need to be around people sort of even supersedes that being annoyed or bothered by the people that you're with thing. Another, idea is people talk about, I was asked a long time ago about, the idea extroverts would go to a party or dance club or something that just to enjoy being around the people dancing. They wanted to have there being noise or something like that going on. I can feel just as out of place in a social situation, even more so than an introvert can, because that whatever the particular activity or environment I'm in is off-putting for whatever reason. So just being around people itself is not always what I want to do. I mean, it is, but it's not 100%. I'm always going to enjoy myself. So just like sometimes you eat something that you don't really think tastes good, but you feel like it's what your body needs at a particular time. That's kind of the way it can be in those situations, because there are times at which I just need to be around people, whether or not I'm really enjoying what we're doing. But I'm obviously going to feel a lot better if I do enjoy the activity. So there are definitely things I'd much prefer to do, but you can tell the difference in the way an introvert responds to that situation, where there's almost you can see a physical revulsion at being forced into a situation like that, where they are in an environment not only surrounded by people, but it's not in any way in their element that they can enjoy themselves. Introverts can enjoy themselves in plenty of social situations when they're kind of in their element and doing an activity they like, or talking with people that, they can be engaged in the conversation about whatever it is that they're into. They just usually have a lower tolerance for that. I've talked with that in a few different videos. I remember the one I did with Amber, also in the Faith and Type series, the first one, where we talked about that, where she said it was something to the effect of just a lesser amount of time, even when she was into it. When we had that video itself, in fact, where she got to a point where she's just too drained from the conversation, even though the topics were things she very much enjoyed talking about. And the only reason she was able to last as long as she did in the conversation was because the topics were those things that she was into. And another example I think of, I don't want to make this one too much longer, but my mother, who's an INFJ, is much better at initiating conversations than I am. Just, I guess, by nature of sort of the way she grew up, the environment she's been in, church, and she was a school teacher for a while, things like that. She learned that behavior over time. And this is one area where I think that possibly the Jungian viewpoint comes into play, where it's possible, I think, that people who prefer extroverted feeling are just a little bit more natural at the situations where they've got to sort of do the small talk thing, or sort of the polite introductions with people. That doesn't mean that introverts are still going to be drained by that, but they can sort of naturally do that a little easier, I think. That's just my theory based on my observation, but it seems to me that that's the case. And so somebody like me, who is an extrovert, but not an extroverted feeler in the Jungian sense, it's a little more difficult, that initial icebreaker type deal. But once I'm into the conversation, once I'm in an element where I'm enjoying engaging with people, I can go much longer and be not only comfortable, but like my energy level rising from that interaction. Whereas, again, somebody like my mother, the opposite would happen. She'd be drained by that activity. She's just better at that initial thing. And so that's why, I just wanted to bring up those examples of things why it's difficult to just observe someone in one environment, or even two or three, and know whether they're really introvert or extrovert in a cognitive sense, because you have to really get to know the person and see them in different environments and kind of actually learn what really is what motivates them, what really energizes them, to really get that idea. So the stereotype of it always being about somebody being outgoing or talkative is an extrovert, and someone who's quiet and in the corner is an introvert, is obviously a stereotype that's not true and doesn't really tell you much. And you also have the people that are like, there is no social observation that can tell you these things. It is entirely in the mind, and it's only about which direction this particular function is moving within the mind, or something. I don't think that's true either. So there may be ways to physically observe the mind. Things like Dario Nardi's experiments with the EEG machine and stuff, in terms of observing actual brain patterns in response to things, and I'm all for more exploration of that sort of thing. But in general, in terms of a practical basis of observing those things, you can see it, but it takes a little bit more work than just kind of the stereotypes. So, and to wrap up this, I had already basically concluded from talking to enough introverts and just being honest with myself that rather than what I was thinking of as introversion was really social awkwardness, and just uncomfortable situations where I had some repression as a child, and in terms of expressing myself, and just not good at those sorts of interactions. So it was more of a skill thing than a preference thing. And so I'd already basically concluded that. And then back in whatever it was, 2013, 2014, somewhere there, I actually took the official MBTI, and lo and behold, came out as ESFP. It wasn't really a surprise. But anyway, as far as the Kersey temperament, role variant. I feel like kind of what he says about composers and performers kind of being able to go back and forth in those roles, I definitely think is true for me. So I guess you could say I prefer performing, but I do a lot of composing too. And that's sort of, it's not an unnatural role for me. It sort of became, it's kind of, I guess, naturally my secondary role, but sort of became my primary role based on life circumstances. So however you want to interpret that. Anyway, that's about it for this week. If you stayed to the end, congratulations. And if you're not already subscribed, please do so. Please like this video and share it with all your friends that need to hear about wonderful introversion, extraversion explanations. And please also leave me comments. I love those. Any feedback is always great, even if it's to say I'm an idiot. I'd rather have that than be ignored. Further proof I'm an extrovert. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, see you next time.